It is 7 o'clock on the dot, so we'll go ahead and get started. Folks are still going to be making their way into the chat box, but again, please go ahead and say hello. Let us know where you're joining from, and we're just so excited to have you. Okay, so welcome and thank you again for joining us. My name is Laura Nelson. I'm the project leader for the Ranchers Stewardship Alliance. We are just thrilled to be here tonight and to have you all joining us from all over the country and several friends in Canada as well. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for being here. This is our 5th and final session in our Rural Resilience webinar series, and it has been just such a joy and a pleasure to get to facilitate these conversations. I know some of you have been here for all 5 of them, and if you have been, we just want to give you a pat on the back and a round of applause and thank you for investing in yourselves and in your ranches and joining us for all of these. They have been so fun. We've had everyone from Dr. Dave Noggle to Nicole Masters to Tris Munsick to Dallas Mount with the Ranch Management Consultants. And tonight we are just thrilled to have Todd Parker with Vence and our own Leo Barthelmess. So many of you are familiar faces, but if you are not familiar with the Ranchers Stewardship Alliance, we want to start by just sharing a little bit about who we are and what we do. The Ranchers Stewardship Alliance is a rancher-led nonprofit organization based in Malta, Montana. We've been around for about 17 years. We started in 2003 with a group of ranchers in South Phillips County who got together to solve some common problems. And that's very much what we still do today is we're a rancher-led organization that looks at the challenges that we face in the ranching community and in our rural communities and say, how can we help and how can we be a part of a solution? Our mission statement is ranching, conservation, and communities, a winning team. And that mission statement means an awful lot to all of us, to those of us who are staff at RSA and to all of our board leadership and to anyone who's involved in the organization. And to us, that means that as ranchers, we can feed the world. With our partners in the conservation community, we can help care for this landscape for a variety of uses and reasons. And that together we can build a better future for our rural communities. And ultimately we can steward and help grow up the next generation of land stewards. Ranchers Stewardship Alliance exists to help multi-generational and beginning ranchers build the collaborative, trusting relationships and community-based solutions that we need to create healthy working landscapes and vibrant rural communities. And we believe that a big part of that is education. Our board and our leaders in our organization are really passionate about that. And they're really passionate about offering opportunities for all of us to learn and grow together and be better stewards every day of this landscape. And so that's what we're here for tonight, is in this Rural Resilience series. So again, if you're just joining in, go ahead and say hello in the chat box, introduce yourself, let us know where you're here from and where you're tuning in. I'll share some housekeeping items. We will ask that you remain muted throughout the presentation. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't want to hear from you. It just means that we would like you to use the chat box to share your thoughts and questions and ideas so that we have a chance to moderate that and make sure that our presenters have the time that they need to share the information that you're here to get from them. So again, please use the chat box. You can use it throughout the evening tonight. So we'll offer that up as a place where you can, again, make comments, ask questions, and I'll be recording that and taking note of what I see in the chat box, and I'll use that to moderate the Q&A later. So use that freely throughout the evening. I do want you to know that this will be an interactive event. So Leo and Todd will give about a 10 or 15-minute introduction to their presentation. Then we'll go into some small group breakouts. So I just want to prepare you for that. Those are most valuable to you and to your fellow participants with your video on and your voice activated. So while we'll ask you to stay muted during the presentation, when you go into the breakout rooms, take yourself off mute. We'd love to see your faces and use that as a time to interact and learn from each other, because we know that peer-to-peer conversations, especially in our ranching community, is the place where we often learn the most. So just keep that in mind. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Todd and Leo and hand it over to them. So again, if you're joining in, say hello. It's so good to see so many familiar faces and some new ones too. So with that, Todd Parker is the Director of Product and Customer Success at Vence Corporation. He has more than 25 years experience in wireless and remote sensing technologies with companies including TRW, IBM, Texas Instruments, and On-Ramp Wireless. At Vence, Todd is applying this experience to help bring new technologies and capabilities to the ranching industry. Todd earned his master's degree from the University of Southern California and his bachelor's degree from Worcester's Polytech Institute, both of those degrees in electrical engineering. And I tell you what, he is a fascinating guy to get to know and spend some time with, and I'm just so thrilled that he's here with us tonight. And our other presenter is our own Leo Barthelmess. Leo is a member of a fourth-generation family ranch alongside his wife, parents, and a brother, and they own and manage the ranch together. Leo and his wife, Darla, have 3 children and 5 grandchildren, 2 of which you saw in that video helping prepare and organize the collars to get ready as we were collaring cows that day. And several are planning to return to the ranching community in the future. The family ranch is in Phillips County, southeast of Malta, Montana. The ranch is a livestock operation raising cattle on private and leased properties, and additional crops include hay and native seed grass. Leo and the ranch continue to search for ways to enhance national food security and provide for sustainable wildlife habitat. And isn't that an admirable goal? With the adaptation of Vence technology, the Barthelmesses continue to move forward in their pursuit to find cost-effective ways to regenerate their soil, their rangeland health, wildlife habitat, and be a profitable ranching enterprise. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Leo to go ahead and get started. And Todd can pull up his slides and we'll let you guys take it away.
All right, are the slides up and ready?
The slides are up and ready.
All right, let's see if I can make it work. There we go.
All right. Well, as Laura said, my name's Leo Barthelmess. I live in northern Montana with my family and co-managers of the ranch. We manage about 20,000 acres of land, private and public. We raise 700 mother cows, retainer replacement heifers on the Matador grass bank. And we have added a stocker steer operation. The ranch has no formal irrigation. We can put extra water on extra acres if we get a big weather event, which we hope's occurring this weekend. New slide, Todd. This is a map of the approximate location of the ranch. We graze cattle on the Barthelmess Ranch, like I said, and the Matador Ranch. We've been in this area for about 60 years, hoping to retain the Barthelmess family in this community for several more generations. Todd, next slide. So this is a basic outline of the ranch. Historically, our grazing practices were very traditional, had very few pastures and moved cattle rarely, not very often. And then after 40 years of studying holistic resource management, we have 38 permanent pastures separated by temporary fences into multiple pastures. And with the addition of the Vence technology, we're now running upwards of 80 pastures and moving cattle weekly or every 10 to 20 days, depending on our schedule for calving and branding and those kinds of situations. Todd? Well, ranching is a difficult business, and one of the things that's been giving us a lot of anxiety, we have over 60 miles of barbed wire fence on the ranch, like many other grazing operations in the West. And some of those fences are 80 years old, and the cost to replace that infrastructure is going to be tremendous. So we've always been looking for alternatives, and Vence has risen to the top of the pile. Another thing, particularly in this area, is we have the second longest wildlife migration in the form of the antelope in North America. The less fences that we have, the better off it would be for their winter survival and other species survival. Through the Rancher Stewardship Alliance and close working relationships with the conservation community, we have a heightened awareness of the needs for wildlife in this region. And we would like to minimize the amount of conflict that infrastructure creates, plus regenerate our soils and our grazing lands. Todd?
All right. This is where I'll pick up. Thank you, everyone, for having me today. Again, I'm Todd Parker. I'm with Vence. Real quickly, Vence is a startup based out of San Diego, California. We've been in business about 5 years, 100% doing virtual fencing. And as Laura mentioned, we all come from a wireless and technology background and trying to bring that experience here to the ranching industry. I'm going to talk a bit about what the system is and the technology and how it works. Just to start off at a real high level, the fundamental starting point is the collar that goes on the animal. And you can see an example there up in the middle of this slide. And I'll talk about that in more detail in just a few minutes. Other parts of the solution are a communications network. You see what we call a tower or a base station here on the left. That allows you to communicate with the collars to either get data from the collar, the most important of which is the animal's location. And the other big piece of it is to be able to provide new virtual fence programming to the collars. All of this is stitched together through the magic of the internet and Amazon Web Services. And all of that information does actually end up back at Amazon service, where we host a website called Herd Manager, which is where the rancher does all of his interfacing, with the system, being able to visualize the data, visualize the farm, and manage the virtual fences. And I'm going to go into a little more detail on other pieces of the puzzle. All right. But to start off, I want to describe a bit about what virtual fencing is. And it is real-time monitoring of the animals and most importantly, control of those animals. The virtual fence allows you to apply pressure to the animal, either auditory or electric stimulus, based upon their location. And with that, call it core capability, you can create a virtual fence line and use that pressure to contain animals within, say, a virtual pasture or virtual paddock. You can also use the same pressure to keep animals outside of an area, an exclusion area, perhaps a riparian zone. It's useful to compare virtual fencing with traditional fencing, particularly single wire. And one way I like to explain the differences between the two, with physical fencing, you have something that is the same for all of the animals. It is 100% effective for all of those animals up until one animal breaks through that single wire, and now the fence is down for everybody. With a virtual fence and the collar, essentially each animal has their own virtual fence. They are independent of each other. And virtual fencing technology is not perfect control of the animals. Again, it is, from a stockmanship point of view, applying pressure to the animals. But what you end up with is a fence line which is, I would argue, between 90–95% effective for all of the animals, all of the time, independent of each other. And that is one of the big conceptual differences between the two. And as we show some of the results on Leo's property, I think you might see that in more detail. Let's go talk about the collar a little bit more. Again, we use a combination of sound and electronic pressure to safely and humanely manage the animals. It is a battery-operated device with a user-replaceable battery cell with up to 2 years of battery life. depending upon how progressively you're using the collars to do grazing, the more work you try to do with the collars, the more moves you try and do, the more battery you're going to use. And so that's why we talk about the up to 2 years, depending upon how it's used. The collar itself supports a broad range of animal sizes. You'll see some pictures in early video with the version 1 collars we had on Barthelmess Ranch that generally only supported adult size animals. This picture here shows a version 2 collar, which can go much smaller in size. And we are currently using this collar on yearling and smaller heifer size animals. It can go small enough to go on a calf, but generally you don't need to virtually fence a calf, just given their own natural behavior. Another important piece of the puzzle is that as I mentioned, the collars operate independently from each other. They also operate independently from the communication system, in that once the collar is programmed with a virtual fence, it provides the pressure based upon those fence lines to the collar. That collar does not connect to the internet, does not need connectivity to the internet, does not need cell service. Once it's programmed, it works. What the communication does is let you change that program, and that leads us to the next section here, which is this communication network. This is a long-range, low-power internet technology recently brought into the market over the past 5 years. I think, as most folks know, virtual fencing itself has been around for probably nearly 30 years, though it is really just, I would say, in the past 5 years that the technology has gotten to the point where it is commercially viable and cost effective. And this technology is a big part of that. The base stations are entirely standalone. They are solar powered, as you can see. They are designed to run autonomously throughout weather events with what's called 5 days of reserve battery. We have 5 towers covering the entire Barthelmess property. Here on the lower right, we can see what the network coverage is for what we've deployed. And getting back to what I had mentioned a little while ago, we don't have coverage 100% everywhere because of the land topography, particularly way up here in the north. There's a spot where the collars may not be able to communicate. However, if a virtual fence is programmed in that area, that virtual fence will work. The collars are standalone. They have their own GPS built into them, and they have all of the smarts necessary to implement the pressure onto the animals. Next, this is the Herd Manager web application. This is a web page that you browse to, just like you might go to the bank or to Walmart or Amazon for online shopping. It's a web page. It is secure in nature. Every rancher, excuse me, has their own login specific to their ranch. We can see on here, this is Leo's property. Data is stored in perpetuity, so we can go back and look at what we did on Leo's property a year ago and revisit the grazing plans and the animal behavior. The tool allows you to visualize landmarks on your property to give you references to how you might wish to subdivide existing paddocks, allow you to visualize water sources is another piece of the puzzle there. You can look at animal locations and track their history, create and manage herds of animals and the virtual fences. And there is essentially no limit to the number of independent herds you can create on your property, and all of them can have independent virtual fences. And the next part of it is, in terms of the virtual fences, The collars can store a number of virtual fences, and those can be scheduled to operate at different times. And with that, you can set up a rotational grazing scheme, and we'll show a demo of that shortly. And so real briefly here, you know, we've been working with Leo since winter 2019, been through a couple of winter grazing efforts and spring grazing efforts. Again, we started with our version 1 collars and deployed roughly 25 kilometers of virtual fence lines. That's equivalent to single wire across 10 pastures, you know, in our first season. In the spring, about 12 kilometers worth of virtual fencing, subdividing 8 pastures. We redid, you know, the winter grazing this past winter. And Leo can talk about the results on that here later. And right now, we're in spring grazing number 2, and we'll be showing shortly here after the break a demo on progressive ladder grazing. And with that, I think we're at the break, Laura.
When you go into the breakout room, we've got 3 questions. Using what you know about this technology right now, how might you see yourself applying this technology? And if you're on a ranch, then obviously that makes sense for you to talk about how might this technology be used on your ranch. But some of you, I know we have folks in the wildlife community or agency folks in the room also. So maybe it's a question of what benefits or value do you see to your industry and how you work with working lands and ranchers in your industry. So what kind of opportunities does this potentially present to your businesses, and what are the challenges you see in applying this technology? So Angel's going to start kicking you into breakout rooms. As you get into your room, go ahead and just introduce yourself, let folks know where you're from, and share for a minute or 2. We'll have 10 minutes. Your thoughts on these questions, and then we'll use this discussion that you have in your breakout room to kind of fuel the beginning of our Q&A session a little bit later. So go ahead and type some of the comments and thoughts or highlights from your discussion into the chat box. Again, we'll use that discussion and those questions and thoughts that you had in those breakout rooms to kind of get our Q&A session kicked off. So as you're coming back in, go ahead and type those into the chat box. Again, what kind of opportunities did you and your group talk about this kind of technology presenting, and what are the challenges you see in applying this technology? So as you're typing that into the chat box, I'm going to go ahead and hand it back over to Leo, and he's going to get started again.
Hi, everyone. Appreciate you coming back for a second round. So the slide that I think everybody can see, at least the one I'm looking at, is a new grazing technique that we've deployed on the ranch. We were calving in the gray pasture to the left that doesn't have the red lines in it, and we moved the cattle to the blue pasture with the red lines in it. Somebody's got a little arrow there, so identifying that. And what we were trying to do was increase the stock density in that pasture with the animals that we had to make the cattle diversify their diet some, because they tend to regraze the same plants they did the year before and tend to leave the same plants they did the year before. So we have an undergrazed vegetative cover as well as, you know, maybe a little overgrazed vegetative cover. So by increasing the stock density in that location, we wanted to make them diversify their diet and get some hoof action to put some of that decadent forage to the ground to feed the soil. And then as we move from the top of the picture to the next pasture down, the grazing plan, ladder grazing, as Todd referred to it, we offer the cattle another 3 days of forage. And as you will see later on in the presentation, that seemed to work very well. And then again, after another 3 or 4 days, and we'll drop the next ladder, and the cows just keep moving in south into the next feed yard. And the amount of time they spend on the north end is very, very a lot less. And then as we move this ladder program on down, then we start building back fences next to the water so they can't go back and regraze. So we're essentially, I was questioned by a number of people about how intensely could we graze, and this looked like a really good way to really test the product, and I've been very happy with the outcome. Todd?
All right. Yep. So, you know, one couple of notes here. What we're looking at is actually Herd Manager, the web page. This is not a slide, and this is the actual, you know, Leo's actual Herd Manager instance is what we call it. And what I'm going to do for this demo is to do what we call an animated grazing view. And we have here 10 days of animal grazing in this ladder arrangement, starting from May 5th to the 15th. So this just completed a couple of days ago. And I'm going to click play and talk more about it as it goes. Let's see if it'll let me play. Yeah. And so here we see in the early part of the first stage of the ladder, the majority of the animals are focused where they need to be, up in step one. We've got a few animals that are escapees. Some of them were cow-calf pairs that we let in to this pasture before it actually went active for the ladder. And so some of them were out and stayed out. And again, the technology isn't 100% perfect. But we can see here, the second stage of the ladder opened up. And as soon as it did, the animals started to go down on that new grass. This point here where it all kind of slows down, that's them sleeping, and they sleep in groups. And so the animals had access to step one, and then we opened up the ladder to go down to step two. They could get to both areas of grazing because the water was step one, but you can see once they got opened up onto that 3 days of the fresh grass, that's where they spent most of their time. And then the same thing happens, boom, here, that third layer opens up, and now the animals are back on, are onto tasty grass again and focusing most of their time down here in this third stage. You can see them going back up to water. You saw a little bit where they went back up to this gate. Maybe Leo was driving his quad around and they went up to go see what was going on. But this is an example of, the power of the virtual fencing technology to manage the land. And then you get to see, how well it's working and where did I put pressure on the land and how did my animals behave. And so I'm going to stop there. And let's see if we can go back to the deck. And Leo, we are back to you with how well it's worked for you and what you've observed.
Well, it worked very well, actually. It exceeded my expectations because I was a little skeptical, knowing cows being cows and their institutional memories. So we challenged their grazing behavior. And in this particular slide, on the north side or the upper side of that red line was their normal winter pasture. And we forced them, encouraged them to graze in a different area. And the product performed very well indeed. And we were able to utilize older, less nutritious feed in the winter when they were at their minimum amount of nutritional needs, and whatever shortfall we felt they had, we would supplement with protein. And what we found in 2 years of observation is that when the cattle knocked down the decadent forage or grazed it the next spring, they were a lot more receptive to going and graze in those pastures without a lot of influence. I think another slide, Todd. One of the things that, we're all only a week away from a drought, and some of us are in one right now. So one of the things that's always given me a lot of anxiety is I have two kinds of grass, the old stuff and the fresh stuff. And when it doesn't rain, I get no fresh stuff. So my drought reserve is a really not very nutritional. And so it requires a lot of supplements to get through a drought. So we are trying to increase our grazing pressure so that we put more of the old stuff to the ground, either as soil amendment or cattle eat it, so that maybe in a couple of years, our drought reserve is only a year old or 2 years old instead of being 5 to 10 years old. We're hoping to upgrade the nutrition in the entire landscape with this increased stock density and management through Vence. Another thing, that the immediate strategy that's encouraging to us is we would like to reduce our hay feeding by 60 days. And the difference between feeding hay and grazing out for us on this, in this landscape, is nearly $1.25 a day. And those are fairly big numbers if you're running very many cows. So that's our immediate payback, is a reduction of our purchase feed costs. Again, you know, you can see the little red lines all over the ranch there. We were just moving cows and you know, achieving our grazing results and moving on, supplementing those cows in those locations with processed feeds that had no seed contaminants, weed contaminants, or anything like that. And we were able to graze out in the winter of 19. We grazed out till the 3rd of March, a complete month to month and a half longer than we do many years. And last year, we didn't feel we had enough forage, and we only grazed out till the 2nd week of February. And you know, so the benefit of the product was immediately apparent for us. And again, as I said, as we removed that decadent forage in outlying areas, the cows were a lot more receptive to grazing. One of the strategies we're able to use is our cows will eat snow. We've been taking a few hints from the Canadians. They've been doing it for many years. And so we can graze a far outlying corner in the winter because they've got water right where they're at. And that has really upped our grazing game. The ability to eat snow and encouraging the cows to graze places that are far away from water. So, you know, it's an emerging technology. The collars are a bit challenging once in a while. Retention is a bit of a problem once in a while. Batteries are a bit of a problem, but the version 2 collars are a big improvement over the version 1. I was asked what kind of savings is there. We're building lots of fence for a lot less investment in time and labor, but part of our time and labor is transferred to a different kind of work. We removing the collars to put new batteries in them, you know, recollaring the cows. And then when you have a brand new set of collars, they all have to be assembled for length. So you have a random selection of length so you can be timely about putting the cattle through the chute. We're doing 80 to 100 an hour, putting them through the chute with a selection of collars at hand. In the video, if you saw the video, my grandchildren were handing out the collars that were the sizes that were called for by the crew. So part of our labor is changed labor, different jobs. So, but the collar is doing wonderful. It's a wonderful product, and with the updates in the collar construction, we've had even less labor invested in assembly and putting them on and taking them off. Next slide.
We might be done.
Really? Great.
Are we missing something?
Gee.
We are done, Laura, and we can move into some of the Q&A.
All right, that sounds good. Perfect. Thanks, guys. Well, we have a lot of great questions and comments in the chat box. And so I'm going to go ahead and get started, and audience, go ahead and continue to put those thoughts and questions in the chat box, and I'll keep monitoring them. So great, obviously great discussion in the breakout rooms as well. Todd, Leo, you guys both know this was going to be the #1 question. So I'll start right there is, what does it cost?
So, on the business model, we have a couple of different ways, depending upon the piece of the puzzle we're talking about. With the collar itself, we essentially lease that. And that is $35 per animal per year. The reason for us doing that is to help manage the capital outlay for the rancher, not having to purchase, say, a $250 or $300 collar like you might see with some of the other players out there. And our goal with that is to really enable the rancher to see an upside as quickly as possible. And it might not be the first year given some of the other things I'll talk about, but we want there to be positive economic benefit as quickly as possible. The batteries are a consumable, and those are $10 each, and you consume those basically, depending upon how you use the virtual fencing technology. For someone, on, call it Leo's, type of scale, I think we're at like 6 to 8 months type of time frame. For somebody who might be more progressive, doing daily or hourly moves of animals, now you're looking at 4 months. We also do a bunch of business in Australia, where a single paddock might be 25,000 acres, and the amount of virtual fencing on that is reduced, and the battery life is a year. So one thing to take a sideways for 1 second, we are trying to model how we use the collars from a battery point of view to match the natural ebb and flow of work on ranches. In Australia, the animals come in once per year, typically. In the U.S., depending upon the operation, it's more like twice per year, and other operations may even be more frequent than that. And so we try and work within that to reduce the labor burden. And again, that kind of goes into some of the cost. All right, back to the question. The towers themselves they vary depending upon how much labor support you would like from Vence, between $9,000 and $12,500 each. And so $9,000 is for a self-install, and the 12,000 number is when myself or one of my compadres come out and do it for you and with you. And that is the cost. I didn't miss anything, Leo, did I? No surprises?
No.
So Leo, I'd love to hear then, tell us a little bit about how you balance those costs, how that compares to traditional fencing infrastructure costs. What are you thinking about when you're hearing Todd talk about those numbers?
Well, I don't, the towers are expensive, and those sound like big numbers, and the rental's expensive, and those sound like big numbers. But with hard wire anymore, electric fences, over $5,000 a mile. Barbed wire is $10,000 to $20,000 a mile, depending on. You can burn up the cost of the collars and the towers with very few miles of fence, and may not get the kinds of results. Probably won't get the kinds of results you can from your grazing management. And I look at the cost of the fencing, the vencing, the rental, and the towers. I divide that by the number of acres in the ranch. And, it's not cheap, but a couple bucks an acre is to increase our forage production by substantial amount is a big deal. And then the reduction of hay, need to feeding hay, it's a fairly quick payback as far as we're concerned on this ranch.
Thanks, Leo. And then another kind of a follow-up question to that is, how many towers might a person need? Another way to ask that is, what's the range of the towers? Todd, you noted how many towers are on Leo's property. And then we'll transition into, we have a number of questions about the coverage of the towers. So let's talk a little bit about the towers, what their coverage is, how many a person needs, how do you estimate that, and what affects those towers' coverage?
Right. So the tower radio technology is very similar to what you might have, you know, in your cell phone or your Wi-Fi. The coverage it affords is very much dependent upon terrain, and in very hilly, canyony terrain, the coverage is reduced because the signal has a hard time propagating. For Leo's property, the nature of northern Montana is what I call kind of rolling flat. And there's about 300-foot elevation change across the entire property. And with 5 towers across the property, and I think we're roughly covering about 35,000 acres of Leo's property, plus a bunch of other property that is not actually his, you know, that's what we're covering, you know, in that type of environment. The other way to answer the question is okay, fine, take land topology out, and how far does it go line of sight? And if you just put up a tower and you shot it straight out, it'll go better than 15 kilometers. And a good example, I was in Colorado last week, deploying on some BLM allotments at the Colorado River. And the allotments kind of are on both sides of the canyon. We actually put up a tower on the south side of the canyon, 10 kilometers away from the ranch, but it was line of sight to the entire property across the canyon, and it works great. And then when this allotment gets time to get covered, that guy is going to put up a tower to cover his neighbor. And that's another example as to you know what it means from a range point of view. All right, did I get that, Laura?
I think so. You might talk a little bit more about those terrain challenges. We had a lot of questions about, okay, what about wooded mountainous terrain? What about weather? How do they perform in different weather events, wind, snow, ice, those kinds of things, hilly again, and really forested terrain? There are several questions around that.
Sure. So, one thing to note is that the callers themselves will work with their program virtual fences, even if they cannot directly talk to a tower at any particular point in time. So that connectivity doesn't need to happen in order for a existing virtual fence to apply pressure to the animals. What you need it for is to change the program in the virtual fence. So looking at that, perfect coverage across an entire property is not necessary in order to have a successful virtual fencing program. We are doing work in Nevada, up in forested areas there. We are doing work in South Carolina, which is flat and heavily forested. Part of our engineering work is to generate a coverage prediction map that uses the same technology for predictions that the cellular phone guys use. And it is a very accurate way to say, hey, what can I do on a particular property? How many towers do I need? Where am I going to have coverage to be able to communicate to my callers? Excuse me. Did I get that?
Yeah, great, perfect. So okay. We've also had a couple of questions on, I'll try to stay a little thematical here as while we're on the towers. Can towers be portable? Can you put them on a trailer, locate them at a certain place, then move them to another location?
Currently, the solution does not support portable towers particularly well, though that is not an uncommon question and something that we are looking at. what I would say is that a fully mobile tower where you can put it anywhere you want is probably not going to make sense, because you need to put the tower in a spot. Generally, it's going to have some elevation advantage beyond a hilltop to be able to provide a good range of coverage to the property. And it also needs to be able to talk through the internet through a cellular link. And so all of Leo's towers talk to Triangle Wireless in his neighborhood. And he doesn't have perfect cellular coverage in every nook and cranny, but where you put the towers, it does, because we're up on hilltops. And so we're working on a concept where we are going to build nomadic towers, where at one part of the season where you're going to be grazing, there's a known location where you can go and put your tower and you put it up there, and you do your efforts for that part of the season. If you move somewhere else, you take it to another known location where we've done the analysis for you to say, hey, this tower is going to work in these locations. So you can move them around, but not just everywhere. Another part of the portable tower aspect is the safety aspect. The technology we have today, it is earth anchored to the ground and designed to withstand hurricane force winds. There is quite a large solar panel on there, and particularly in Montana with, the short days in the winter, it's an even bigger solar panel and twice the number of batteries that say we might put in Arizona. But keeping that technology anchored to the ground through foul weather events is a big part of that solution, and keeping it safe and robust, and you don't want it to tip over and break.
Yeah. One more tower question, and then I'm going to have a handful of cow questions. So Leo, get ready. So Todd, are towers interchangeable? If say I were Leo's neighbor and I put up a tower on my property, can we swap and use each other's towers to communicate signals to our cattle, or vice versa?
Yes. So the towers themselves will bridge communications from any caller to the internet and send the data up to the internet. The security of the data gets managed at that point. So a neighbor wouldn't be able to look at Leo's data. That's all segregated basically on Amazon servers. But the towers themselves can provide blanket coverage. And one of the things we've been talking to, with, folks like Nature Conservancy, Forest Service, NRCS, would they put up towers in a particular area? And in order to encourage the adoption of the technology, anybody's callers can talk across that basin. And one of the use cases, particular to Leo's property with the Nature Conservancy was, they have, lease grazing rights, on their properties, and the callers can work in both areas and be able to track what's going on and virtually fence, on both areas, and a very powerful tool, for somebody, like a Nature Conservancy or a federal entity to be able to facilitate, the technology. And Leo's towers already cover some of his neighbors. So, and we can say how good, and then Leo can barter for a case of beer.
Very good. So, and you answered this, but I want to make sure that the person who asked this question gets to hear that you're answering their question. The question was about what if it gets, minus 30, 40 degrees and the sun doesn't shine for 5 days? I heard you say you make sure you have batteries in the solar, connected to the solar panels that are appropriate for the environment. Is that right?
That is correct. And we were particularly worried about going to northern Montana. Whenever we here in San Diego see on the news, hey, it was minus 40 in the US today, it's there. where that happens. And so, you know, we've been through a couple of winters, probably not as harsh as they've ever been, but the technology was designed to withstand 40 below. The batteries are AGM cell. We've doubled up the number of batteries again compared to warmer latitudes, and it is designed to last through 5 days of weather events. And with respect to snow and ice, typically we're trying to put these towers on a hilltop where wind happens to be our friend, and we have yet to have a tower get buried in 6 feet of snow because we don't put them places where there can be a snowdrift that doesn't work for the radio as well as, you know, call it the snow.
All right, great. Thanks, Todd. And I'm sure we'll have some more questions related to the technology. For now, I want to kick it back over to Leo. Leo, tell us a little bit about the animals in your herd that you chose to collar first and why you chose them, and we can go from there.
We chose to collar the mature cows. They require the least amount of maintenance in the winter, and since the project we were only able to start in November and to do the grazing experiment in the winter, we chose the mature cows to do that. They would be the least affected by adversity, take the least amount of inputs to maintain their, you know, health and husbandry practices. So we chose the mature cows, which in hindsight, that was probably the most difficult class of cattle as well. A dry, mature cow that's pregnant has a will of her own. They pretty much do what they want. So.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about what effects you saw the collars have on the animal behavior. That could be from a range of different perspectives, from, you know, any changes in their performance, any changes in their breed up rates. Tell us a little bit more about any of those performance changes that you might have seen.
We never noticed any performance changes. Having the ability to manage the collars, we could target, like last year was a really good clover year in the summer. So we were able to, you know, move the cattle through pastures we would have been reluctant to in the past. And we just kept clover in front of the cattle when they would quit eating the clover because it was mature, or they thought they'd gotten the best of it. When they started eating grass, we'd move to a new pasture with clover in, or to a segment of a pasture with clover in it. And our conception rates were very good. Our weaning weights were average. I have noticed a heightened sense of awareness with the cows. They're not aggressive or anything, but they do seem to pay more attention to a lot of different stimuli. I have noticed that you know, because they'll go along and they'll hear the audible noise, and they're a lot more attentive than they were before.
And Leo, maybe it would be helpful if you shared a little bit about the training process that the cows had to go through before they were actually put out into the virtual fencing paddocks.
Well, Todd recommended the training process. We built virtual fences along 3 barbed wire fences, and then there was a virtual boundary that was out in the middle of nowhere. And the cows, being the cows, and they wanted to go to their historic winter pasture, they went right to the north fence. And when they got close to that fence, they had a visual stimuli of an existing fence. They heard the audible, and maybe a small number of them had some electrical stimulation. And then a couple days later, they drifted back away from that fence, and then they ran into the barrier out in the middle of nowhere. And the results were, you know, within, I think the one instant on the 3rd day, Todd said 234 cows hit that fence at one time, and only a very small number went through the virtual fence. So, I mean, they learn it very quickly. And I've watched cows run into it a time or two, and either I didn't remember where it was at, or they went across it and came back, in which case, because they can go one way without getting shocked, and when they come back the other way, they go back in if they've escaped, and when they come back, they will get some stimuli. So I've seen cows do it, and it doesn't take them very long to learn it. They understand the concept.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so tell us a little bit more about how the cows reacted to the collars themselves. What kind of issues or challenges did you have with them rubbing on them? Somebody asked if there was a way to disincentivize the cattle from rubbing if they got like a shock if they started to rub or the collar was close to coming off, something like that. But tell us a little bit about how the cattle responded to the collars themselves. I've
seen the cattle rub on rocks and trees and each other, and there's been a small amount of loss. Most of the loss was created by me when I didn't unroll a bale core when we were feeding, and they got to struggling over a bale core, and I lost a couple of collars immediately with them fighting each other. But with the new collars, hasn't been very much loss. We've only picked up a few, less than 1%. So we're not unhappy with the way it's working. Yeah, and I've seen on the older collars, I've seen like cut banks on reservoirs. So, but I've seen them. We got a big tree in one lone pasture, and I've not found a collar under it yet this year. So, and I've seen lots of cows rub on that tree.
And
Todd, another aspect of that, Laura, is that the collars do have a designed brake strength, and so at about 650 pounds of pull, that buckle will pop. And the idea is that hanging an animal on a tree would be bad. Now 650 pounds is probably a little low for a large animal to be able to injure themselves, but it's where we're at today. But that injury of the animal by the collar is a concern, and animal welfare across the board.
Thanks, Todd. Leo, one comment says, Leo asking you to talk about using the collars for fire break grazing.
I think the potential's there if the cows will respect it. When you run them that low on forage, they might challenge the collar even more, but I literally think that's possible. In fact, that was one of the early things we valued in the product, because we leave so much forage in our pastures that those cattle in jeopardy to a lightning strike and a wildfire. Okay. No, we have purposely done that, or are doing that.
I'll add to that, Laura. Oregon State is running a fire break trial this summer with us. And I expect that effort will be published in the fall with respect to how well, that worked in their situation. And that is Oregon State and USDA and U.S. Forest Service.
Great. Okay, and maybe Todd, maybe you could share a little bit now about some of the different uses for the collars. Are there applications in other species? The commenter namely asked about sheep or bison, but are there applications in other species? And then another individual asked about using them on bulls. Tell us a little bit about some of the other variations or uses that you've seen in the collars.
So, sticking with the cow family, we are doing virtual fencing with bulls, and Leo said a mature cow has a mind of her own. I would say a mature bull doesn't have a mind, but he can do anything he wants on the property. So they are challenging to manage. But the net goal or the net gain of applying some pressure to those animals does exist. And we did a recent experiment on a bull operation here in California. It was essentially a riparian restoration exercise where a highway department wanted to use animals to basically trample down scrub. And there was no feed in this area. So the animals were basically 100% fed. but the goal was to use the virtual fence to contain the bulls on portions of the property and kind of do a rotational stomping and across it. And the collars were 50% effective in managing the bulls. In that scenario, tremendous amount of pressure, particularly with the forage and the water. And the endeavor was 100% successful because he was able to get the right pressure on the land and do the trampling and demonstrate this. And this is a situation where this rancher was being paid to graze and trample for restoration. So, you know, bulls are part of the puzzle, but they are a challenge. With respect to other animals, we are considering sheep and goats, bison. A lot of it kind of boils down to the business case associated with that. You know, the value of virtual fencing on goats and sheep is different from cows, and we are heavily focused on the beef ranching industry right now. So, but I do expect that we will explore other industries. I did get a phone call one time asking if we could do reindeer in Southeast Alaska. I immediately said yes, and then my boss said no because I wanted to go to Southeast Alaska. But you know, it's all possible. Excuse me. It is whether it's where it's going to fit in our roadmap, and you know, what is the business case, and where is the value for the sheep herder, and how would the technology do there? There's a lot of research on using virtual fences on sheep where you don't necessarily collar all of the sheep in order to get a level of effectiveness on it. And so, you know, that's stuff that we're paying attention to. You know, with respect to cows, it is different. You know, we like to, you know, collar every cow and find that maximizes the effectiveness of the tech.
Interesting. Well, I'm going to follow up on that, Todd, because there was another question asking, is it necessary to collar every animal in the herd to get optimum results, or could you collar a smaller percentage of the herd to keep them in your targeted grazing area?
So what we've found is we generally do recommend that we collar every animal, you know, particularly as we got started. You know, collars would fall off the animals, or they would stop working, or a battery would fail. And so we like to keep some of that, what we call margin with respect to herd efficacy, reserved so that we can continue to maintain the grazing goals. The other thing that we've seen is if you've got a large herd of animals, you know, like what Leo has, if you have 20 or 30 animals who don't have a collar, they're going to learn that their buddies don't have a collar, and they'll subherd, and they'll go do whatever they want. And, you know, we saw that, you know, that first winter as the system kind of, you know, came to its experimental closure. There were subherds of animals where the collars were either off the animal or flipped over or didn't work. And so that's the answer to that. And, you know, I think one of the things when you think about the collar and the pressure, and from call it a stockmanship point of view, you know, the animals experience lots of sources of pressure on them to do what they do. Their natural instincts, feed draw, water draw, pressure to move away from something like a fire or a predator. But herd draw definitely adds to the effectiveness of the virtual fence. And like Leo said, you know, when they're collared, they get a heightened sense of awareness. And Leo's mentioned they also get a tighter herd pack. You know, I think Leo described it once almost as if a predator's around, and that is good for the effectiveness of the collars, and it's also good for the pressure on the land. And I want to hand that back to Leo to make sure I didn't speak out of turn.
No, that's true. I agree with that statement. Absolutely. No.
So a couple more questions about the collars on the cows. Leo, any problems with cattle getting sores from the collars?
Have not identified even a little bit of hair loss. No, they have had no sores whatsoever. The next day after you remove the collars, you can't even tell where they were. I mean, there's no problem at all about the health of the animal and the collars.
Cool.
I will add from Vence's experience elsewhere that is not always the case, and something that we are paying attention to. Particularly animals with a softer neck, like a Brahman type of breed. We have seen sores develop on animals, and we are working to figure out, do we have the collars on too tight? Do we have the collars on too loose? Is there something that we need to do with the design to manage that and improve that situation? So it's a little bit breed dependent. It is our experience.
Great. So a good question from Maggie, asking what would happen in the case of an emergency, for example, a wildfire in which you had to move your animal somewhere really quickly. It's not programmed, and maybe there's not enough time to signal or update the collars. Is there like a emergency off switch? What would your response in that scenario be?
So we do have an emergency off switch. It is not an instantaneous off switch, and it does take time for it to get down to the collars. And depending upon coverage, it can take several hours for it to get down to the collars. One thing we recommend in a scenario where there is potentially a high fire threat, that you always have in the collar a pre-programmed time when it's going to disable. So instead of having to go in and hit the emergency off button, you are going in and hitting the emergency renew me for another day because there's no fire in the area. And that is the safest way to try and work around, call it some of the communication delays. My next answer to the question is that the collars do apply pressure, but it is not absolute pressure. It is not absolute control. A fire or a predator will drive the animals through a virtual fence line. They'll take the hit and they'll go. Ranchers on horseback and dogs can drive the animals through a virtual fence line. Not something we recommend, because now the animals are getting multiple sources of pressure. And I would say we would have a safety concern for the riders involved in that sort of thing. And if you mix up with a bunch of animals as you're pushing through, but in the emergency scenario, you can get those animals out.
Great. Guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap up around 8:30. So we have a little bit more than 10 minutes left to go. So I have a few more questions in the hopper here, but if you have questions that we haven't gotten to, or you think maybe it got buried back in the stack, go ahead and drop those in there again, just to bring them up to the top of the pile here. Leo, there were several questions around the idea of, would you recommend using this as boundary fence? Is there still value in boundary fencing? What does, a couple of folks commented when it comes to wildlife benefits. What about the worry of trespassing, poachers? That could be a concern if we're talking about removing boundary fencing, marking property lines. Can you just talk a little bit about your considerations for where you've used or where you've chosen to not to use this technology and why?
So at this point in time, the technology is really good, but I would not use the technology to replace boundary fences. I certainly would entertain replacing many of the interior fences. There's a couple of critical situations where I wouldn't depend on it to keep the cows out of a lush field alfalfa at the wrong time. That could be disastrous, but rangeland to rangeland, I'm pretty confident, the Vence could replace all your interior fences. Another question, I was reading through the questions here that and Todd can speak to it as well. But when a cow passes through the boundary, when the Todd or the caller can do a preset number of stimuli. So, but as soon as the cow gets through the red zone, the caller no longer is activated. So they are allowed to recover from, the stimulation and collect their thoughts. And when they go back through it, there's no stimulation at all. So, I mean, the company's been very mindful of animal welfare. So that's one thing. And another thing about the wildfire question, with increased stock densities, you have a lot less fuel around your animals. So, I mean, there is a less opportunity for fire threat because there's a reduced fuel load and may be able to put it out easier. Any more questions like that?
Couple things to add, Laura. On the perimeter fence, there is a good use case on the virtual fencing to augment your perimeter fence and to extend the life of the perimeter fence and provide monitoring of animals that do violate the perimeter. We do not want to have a scenario where we're responsible for keeping animals off of railroad tracks or off of highways, but backing up, a physical barbed wire that might be a little more aged and giving it a few more years of life, definitely something we can do. And similarly, going back to the bull question, we have a couple of customers who are considering using single wire in combination with virtual fencing in order to reduce the amount of time they spend maintaining the single wire. And, in certain situations, you're repairing single wire for bulls multiple times per day. If a virtual fence can augment that and reduce that maintenance, by a factor of 2, 3, 4, that's a huge win from a labor point of view.
Yeah. Very good. Todd, a couple more questions on, are there additional costs for data collection, and how is that managed?
So there are no additional costs for the data collection. Everything is all built into the service fee associated with the collar. And so you get the virtual fencing technology, the tracking, the grazing view. That's all part of the solution. I will say in the future we may do additional things like health monitoring or estrus detection, and depending upon how well we're able to do that, that might be a value added upsell, so to speak, for certain operations. But that's not where we're at today. You get all the data, and there's nothing hidden. Everything I said earlier is the sum total, and Leo checked me on that.
Sounds good. Earlier, we had a couple more questions about just the life expectancy of the towers and the life expectancy. You touched on the life expectancy of the collars a little bit, but could you review that one more time?
Yeah, so the life expectancy of the collars is generally not a concern for the rancher and the customer. You are paying for a collaring service, and if we have to replace your collar because it's broken, that's on us. You're paying for a functioning collar. The other thing that the collar, lease rental approach gives you is you don't have to be concerned about technology obsolescence. It's on us to make sure you've got the technology that works, that provides the features, that we're selling you. And if you need a new version of collar in order to improve something, that's just same $35, per year, and it's on us. That said, I will share a little bit of insight into the business, and, our goal is to have the collars have a usable life of 5 to 7 years. And if we're able to support that and provide that service for that amount of time, that's when we as a business make money. And that is, again, we're an ongoing, startup, and we have to show our path to revenue. And that's, where we go, is to be able to get a collar that will go through 5 seasons, and then we're making money. On the tower, everything in the tower is what you would call telecommunication in the engineering world. It is built who put together technology for the cell operators. I would expect the operational life of the technology in there to be at least 10 years, likely the 15 to 20 year type of range before something, call it breaks. And so it's very robust. The one exception to that is the batteries that are in there. So they are AGM. We expect those to need to be replaced every 3 to 5 years, depending upon environment and in the harsh temperature swings of Montana. I would expect 3 years where we would need to be swapping out batteries. But the rest of it, should be rock solid. The solar panel is a high grade residential panel designed for high wind load, high snow load with a 25-year warranty lifespan. So we're trying to make sure that everything lasts, because we only want to put it in once, and we don't want to have to go back and visit it very much. And I think to date, we've only had to visit Leo's sites maybe once, and that was when an animal of some flavor got caught in the guy wire and kind of pulled down the mast a bit. And so one of the things we do is try and do a physical fence around the tower, because not everything is going to be collared on the property, and it makes a really good scratching post for elk.
Thanks, Todd. One really good question in here as we wrap up: how does a person get started using this kind of technology? Where do they go? Where do they start? And Leo, maybe you can start by answering this by sharing a little bit about how you got started, and then Todd, you can share what kind of some of the logistical steps might be.
Well, we found out about Vence, and we had the resources to reach out to them, and working with the Rancher Stewardship Alliance, explained our situation, the ranch, the location, the potential for, a grand experiment in supporting wildlife migration. And thankfully, Vence and Todd Parker were very supportive of the plan, and they accepted our proposal. And I've referred lots of customers to Todd. I fielded lots of phone calls, and I just refer them to Todd. And so I'll let Todd follow up with what potential customers should do.
So, we are a young company, and this is an emerging technology. It's not perfect, but we're working to improve it. And, all of our customers right now are partners. They're helping us learn the strengths and weaknesses of the technology, the benefits of the technology for the land. How do we use the technology for the benefit of the land, the operation for profits? And so we're not at a stage yet where it's in a catalog and you click on some things and you get stuff. That said, we are starting to, what is called a commercial ramp, and we're engaging with more and more customers and bringing more partners on. In 2020, we built around 5,000 to 6,000 collars that went on about 14 different properties. This year, we're targeting around 30,000 to 50,000 collars that will end up on 40 to 50 properties across the US and Australia. And we're looking to expand from there. And so the way to get started is to contact me or contact Vence through info@vence.io and say you're interested in what you're looking to do and where you're at. Then what we can do is talk about what your ranching goals are, what the capability of the technology is, and really how many towers it's going to take to achieve your goals, and start to scope out a way to get started. And, not everybody wants to put up towers to cover the entire property. People want to come out and maybe start a little bit conservative. Hey, we want to start over in this section. And so that's the conversation, we entertained. We're typically looking, for partners that have herds on the order of 300 to 500 animals in the U.S. We're not in a position right now to work with folks that have 25 or 50 animals. So we're not at that scale yet, but the scope of what Leo does, and others in the area, that's what we're trying to do. And again, the way to get started, reach out and we start the conversation. What do you have? What do you need? And we say what we can do for you, and we take it from there.
Great. Thanks, Todd. And I will have Angel, if you don't mind dropping a couple of links in the chat box. She's going to put a link to the Vence website. There's contact information there. We're also going to put a link to the post-event survey. And in that post-event survey, there's a location where you can say, yes, I want Todd or Leo to contact me. So I can have a direct one-on-one conversation with them. And so if you put your information in that post-event survey and make that request, then either Todd or Leo will reach out to you and connect with you about those very specific questions. So like I said, those links are in the chat box right now. I want to close tonight with a couple more questions to Leo. And as I go through the chat box, I asked a lot of the questions that focus on the concerns or the challenges or how does this work? But what I noticed in the comments is that there were a lot of folks saying, wow, we see this as a huge opportunity. This seems really exciting. This could make a lot of changes. It has a lot of potential. So Leo, just tell us a little bit about what excites you about this technology. What excites you as you think about the future of your ranch? Or the ranching industry when you think about opportunities like this?
Well, I'm a longtime student of Alan Savory and holistic resource management. And because of our arid nature, 11 inches of rainfall, we did not ever think that we could achieve, it wasn't cost effective to put up temporary fence with our wildlife populations. And we didn't raise the tonnage of feed to justify those costs. And now with the Vence technology, we can do that. And so it's been a lifetime dream of mine to participate. I read about all these wonderful areas that are able to do that. And now we can do that. And we're already starting to see the benefits of increased stock density in, less bare ground, more plants per square foot, and not just livestock forage, but just more plants per square foot. So those are super positive things to me. And I made a small presentation. You alluded to this. I think it's something that will engage the young people. And whether or not you believe in global warming, but there is a huge amount of interest in carbon sequestration, and livestock and grazing management can be big contributing solutions to carbon sequestration. Cattle can put carbon in the rangelands, and if it could be a whole new industry all in itself. Even if you don't eat beef, you might still want cattle on these rangelands to sequester carbon. So there's a lot of exciting potential for everything that could happen with this product.
Cool. And Todd, anything that you'd like to share there? What do you see as the future of this technology? Say, if you forecasted 50 years in the future, what excites you looking into the future potential of this kind of technology?
I'm really personally excited. I've been doing virtual fencing for 3 years. I don't have a ranching background or an agricultural background, but I've learned a lot along the way. I'm really excited about what Leo alluded to, and ecosystem restoration, soil restoration, ranch land restoration. And the virtual fencing is one tool there, of several that you can employ, to get the ecosystem to function the way nature intended it to, with the ruminants on the land, restoring, the natural plants, the biodiversity of the plants, the biodiversity of the insects, the birds, and all of it is good and it's worthwhile, you know, to do. And so that to me is what's exciting. It's a worthwhile endeavor if we can make it work, because it's all good stuff.
Well, I think that is a perfect place to wrap this evening up. Todd, thank you. And thank you, Leo. Thank you to all of you for great questions. And I apologize if we didn't get to all of the questions in the chat box. We tried to cover a pretty wide range of them, but my hat's off to all of you in the audience for asking great questions, making great comments, and being super engaged tonight. We really appreciate it. Again, if you have additional direct questions, if you click on the link that Angel put in there for the post-event webinar survey and put your information in there, then we'll forward that on to Leo and Todd to reach out to you. So thank you again for being here this evening. We will have a recording of tonight's seminar available later this week, and we'll share that with all of you and other registered users. So please feel free to forward that on. And we would be remiss if we didn't put a small plug in where we have loved having these virtual webinars this winter and into the spring, and what a joy it's been to see you all. But we are really excited to get to see people in person again, and would love to have you all in North Central Montana this summer during our Nicole Masters North Central Montana Soil Health Tour. So we're having soil health events facilitated by Nicole in person on ranches in Winnett, Malta, Glasgow, and Circle, Montana in June and July. And so we are really looking forward to getting together in person on the ranch to get our hands in the dirt and talk about soil health with Nicole. So that information and registration for those events are on our website, ranchstewards.org. And again, we just thank you. We appreciate you. And we're looking forward to seeing you again soon at another Rancher Stewardship Alliance event down the road. So thank you everyone for joining us. And thank you again to Leo and Todd for your time and your efforts to share tonight. So.
Thank you very much. Appreciated the time.
Same here. Thank you for the opportunity. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, it has.